Hey everybody, and welcome back to a new video. This video will be a change of pace for me. I recently gave a presentation online to over 4,000, yes, 4,000 people were registered on the topic of rescuing dull and lifeless images using processing in Lightroom Classic. Like going from this to this. As wildlife photographers, we often go out and take photos of our wildlife in conditions we can't control, so they often look dull and lifeless on the back of our camera and on our computer. What can we do about that? Often having a good handle on processing techniques can help rescue these images from oblivion. This presentation was in partnership with the Journal of Wildlife Photography, hosted by my friend, fellow Canadian, and excellent wildlife photographer, Bill Maynard. The Journal of Wildlife Photography is an organization I've partnered with before. I've been selling my wildlife photography course in partnership with them for 2 years. Members of the journal have access to monthly trainings like the one I provided in this video, monthly photo competitions with prizes, actual photo critiques after contests, and members get a quarterly digital magazine. I'll leave a link in the description below so you can check them out. And in this presentation, I'm launching a brand new course, Wildlife Photo Processing Essentials. This one is for processing wildlife photos in Lightroom, to take your photos from this to this, and this to this. Stay tuned for the reveal in the presentation and how to get access to $100 limited time launch discount on my course. So without further ado, here's my presentation. It's about an hour long, but folks had so many questions in the Q&A session after that we stayed for almost another hour. If you have any questions that arise from my presentation, leave them in the comments below and I'll try to get to them. Thank you so much, Bill. By the way, I lost your picture, but oh, you're back. I'd lost you for a second. I had your wolves, but not you. So hi everyone, glad you're here. Hello to all my friends that I've been on tours with in the past or are coming with me. I think Bill Lindell might be there, and I saw John, and I saw a number of people that I thought, and Mary may be there, that some folks who've been with me before or are going with me. So really glad, and some Nova Scotia photographers that are friends of mine as well. So thanks so much for being here. Is my audio good, Bill? Everything good?
Yes, you're good, Simone.
Perfect. So, and you've got my presentation there?
I sure do. Full screen, ready to go.
Thank you. Sounds good. So today what we're going to be talking about, basically, Bill ran it down. You come home, sometimes you got some images, you were hoping they were good, but you come bring them home and they need some work. So we're going to talk about what needing some work looks like. Quick introduction on me. Not going to do much here. Let me just see if I can get my presentation to move around here. So my name is Simon d'Entremont, and I live in Nova Scotia in Eastern Canada. As Bill said, I'm a Canon Ambassador. I'm a KASE Filters Ambassador. I love taking wildlife photos. I like going to Africa a lot. These are baboons. I get some elephants at sunset. I love shooting foxes right in the backyard or near home. I do some landscape photography as well. Wendy Hunter, I saw, is on. She lives nearby, near here, Peggy's Cove, Nova Scotia, one of the most famous landmarks. I love going out and photographing storms and hurricanes. I do deep space astrophotography. Interestingly enough, though, this is Andromeda taken with a 500 millimeter f4 like you use for wildlife photography. I definitely need to make a YouTube video on how to do this. But I also use a deep space astro camera and a telescope, like a cooled camera that is dedicated for astrophotography, for example. Hold on. And then I love doing Milky Way photography as well, crawling around the province and other places in the middle of the night. But I'm a kind of a bird guy at heart. My genesis was doing bird photography, so I do lots of bird photos. But lately, a lot of Africa stuff. And Bill mentioned I've got a YouTube channel that I'm super blessed that people are enjoying either my photos or my teaching style, or they're enjoying something. So, and I'm really grateful for that because it's given me lots of amazing opportunities. So let's jump in. As is my educational style, I have to explain why things are before we start talking about what to do about it. So why do we have dull photos? Well, a lot of times we're in a wildlife photography business, and we are in a tough spot sometimes because our wildlife likes to start the day early and finish the day late and take naps during the middle of the day. So we're out in bad conditions, dark clouds. We've got equipment limitations. Fast lenses are really expensive, so we might have a slow lens in dark conditions. We have conditions limitations. We might be under the jungle canopy where it's really dark. We may have harsh lighting, that maybe you find something in the middle of the day and the light is really harsh. That actually makes for a dull photo in a different type of dull. We might have really uneven lighting between the subject and background. We might have subject in the shade, background in the sun, or vice versa. Time of day, I mean, when I'm in Africa photographing big cats, by 8:30 in the morning, they're taking a nap in the long grass. So the action is early and late. And the nature of raw files, as well as they are a bit flat. It's raw digital data. It hasn't been prettied up like a JPEG does in your camera. And as well, your back LCD on the back of your camera is actually showing a JPEG representation of your raw file. It's actually not showing your raw. So you look at the back of the camera, it looks pretty good. You open it up on the computer, it looks even worse. And finally, I am going to state user error, but I put it last because I want to put a nail in the coffin of this thing that people will say online. Oh, if you can't take the photo right the first time, you're not a good photographer, give up. What a bunch of bullpucky. These folks are obviously not wildlife photographers. If you're in a studio with lighting and you can't get the photo right, that's something else. But, the reality is user error is a small part of why wildlife photographers come home with dull photos. We are subject to the limitations of equipment and conditions, and we do the best that we can, but sometimes the best still doesn't make the prettiest photo right out of the camera. So what's the problem in the photos that are kind of dull and so on? Usually there's a lack of dynamic range. The color's very muted. There's no light direction, and light direction gives you both sharpness and it gives a style to the photo. There's a lack of clarity in the photo, and the white balance may be totally out of whack. So here's a photo of a coyote here in Eastern Canada. And note something in the histogram. You see the histogram on the upper right? It's all crowded in the middle. And this is often what you're going to see in your histogram in a flat, dull photo. The darks aren't dark enough and the lights aren't light enough. There's a lack of contrast. Now I can take the contrast slider and slide it to the right here. And oops, I can't actually. Sorry, that's just a photo. But the photo's flat because the whites aren't white and the blacks aren't black. So we're going to talk about fixing that in a bit. Now, what else? So here are some other examples of photos of mine. Shorted out in the middle of a field in the snow and the rain, and it's just a muddy field. That looks kind of flat. A tricolored heron, which is really rare here in Nova Scotia, in the middle of a big field of grass. It's not very exciting. I got some beautiful baby red foxes, but in the shade, surrounded a bunch of crap, a bunch of branches and everything. I've got a wood duck that should be these beautiful colors, and it's not. And even a leopard sitting on a tree after sunset, this is like ISO 6400 or 8000, is not as pretty as it could be. And here as well, this is ISO 10,000, I think. This was a half hour or 15 minutes after sunset. And some more leopards in the shade, getting really dark, next to some elephant poo. It was a great scene and I was really excited to see it, but the photos when I brought them home weren't as exciting as they could be. And here, this Lapland longspur in the middle of a snowstorm. I'm actually 10 feet away, the minimum focus distance on my 500 millimeter lens, and I come home and it's all haze. And even a photo like this with a lion cub, if you switch it to black and white, you can actually see. You look at the histogram on the right, it's all clumped up in the middle. There's no darks, there's no lights. It's all midtones. And when I turn it to black and white, it's just, you can hardly see anything in the photo. So again, this is the problem statement I said earlier. And what are we going to do about it? I have this 3C technique, which is we're going to work on the clarity, the contrast, and the colors. And what we're going to do, we're going to try to increase the dynamic range of the photo that probably doesn't have enough. The whites aren't white enough and the blacks aren't black enough. We're going to increase the contrast, which is basically doing the same thing. When you increase the contrast, the histogram is going to get stretched, and the whites will get whiter and the darks get darker. We're going to saturate the right colors and not the wrong colors. You see, because saturating really bad colors at high ISO might not be the best approach. We're going to accentuate the light direction. We're going to add clarity in the right places, and we're going to fix the white balance. So let's go over to Lightroom Classic here. And Bill, just got a check from you. Is that showing full screen here?
Copy that, Roger. We're good.
Okay, we are in business. So this is a photo. So I've got a selection of photos here. I'm not sure how many I'm going to get through. I've got a selection of photos here. I'll show you here. I've got 6 photos. I've got a leopard. I've got this kind of dull wood duck. I've got this razorbill, a robin, some zebras, and a lion. So we'll see how many of these we can get through. So basically, what's our approach here? Here's an example of a photo, and it's dull. The reason it's dull is subject in the shade, background in the sun, and it makes for a really harsh environment here. In that, if I go over to the Develop tab here, so I'm using Lightroom Classic, the latest version. If I was trying to expose this leopard appropriately in the field, I'd brighten it, but then I'd blow out the background. And if I want to preserve more of the background, I'd shoot it darker, but then our subject would be much, much darker. And by the way, in this scene, this is a leopard under a tree. It had stashed a gazelle up in the tree, and some kites were flying around, and it was looking up at its prey, wondering whether or not it needed to go up there and scare them away. So back to your question earlier, Bill, you were asking about, is the R1 enough megapixels? 24 megapixels on the Canon R1. This was shot with the R1. And I think there's plenty of sharpness there with a sharp lens. So I'm going to do a crop here. And so what's my strategy here? I mentioned earlier that there's just not enough, especially in our subject, there's not enough tonal range and there's not enough dynamic range. I actually need to, if you look these whites here, these whites are not white at all. Actually, if I put a little box, the cropping box, and make it really small, the histogram, by the way, reflects what's in the cropped box. So if you look at what's inside the box, you look at the histogram, there's nothing in there with any brightness at all. So we really got to work on getting some more exposure on this, but without messing up the rest of the photo. So one thing I can do right off the bat is, and using masks in Lightroom Classic is really powerful these days. I'm going to click on a subject mask, which I'm not going to be able to explain every button I press, but there's a mask creation tool here, and I make a subject mask. And here I can raise the exposure a little bit. Now, you got to be careful. You can't raise it too much and it'll look unnatural. But we do want to raise the exposure a bit. And the thing with subjects that are in the shade, often in your wildlife photo processing, if you've got a subject shot in bright sun, what you may often be doing is you may find, because it's in bright sun, there might be some shadows. So you're going to raise the shadows, and the white parts in the bright sun are often too bright, and you lower the highlights. So you lower the highlights and raise the shadows when you're got a subject in full bright sun. When it's in the shade, you actually do the opposite. The problem is the whites aren't white enough right here, and the blacks are probably some version of gray. So what we're going to do here, we can increase if we want the contrast, but it's going to make it a bit darker. So I'm going to raise the exposure a bit, I'm going to raise the whites a bit, raise the highlights a bit, and I'm just going to get those whites on my subject. Rather than being gray as they were, I'm going to get them, more some version of white. Now, as well, these blacks sometimes get a bit gray in the shade. So you can actually make them a bit darker. So the white's up a bit and the shadow's down a bit, which is equivalent, the same thing as sliding the contrast slider to the right. You're making more contrast and you're stretching that histogram. So here, as you can see, we've raised the whites a bit. Now I can add a bit of saturation if I want. Now you got to be cautious as well. Sometimes these whites in the shade here, like here, are going to have a blue tinge to them. And you got to be careful. Like it might look a little bit blue like this, for example. And if you raise the saturation, you might make those blues like this, like really blue. So be very careful. And you can adjust that by raising the color temperature a little bit and you'll get rid of some of that blue. So now our subject is gotten a bit brighter. Now, something else in real life, usually the stripe in the middle of the breast here of our subject, like a leopard, would be a bit brighter. So I can actually take a radial gradient here and put it in the middle. And this way it'll have a little bit of fall off and just raise the whites here in the middle of its throat a little bit more. So I've raised that up a bit. What else do I do on my subject? I've started on the subject here. You see these eyes. And by the way, when you want to increase your zoom, you might go over here and click this little thing here and then increase the zoom here to 200%. By the way, it's a much faster way of doing that. Just hit Control and it'll turn into a little crop box. That would be Command on a Mac. And just draw a little box and it'll zoom up to the little box you created. Now, sometimes I like to do a little eye treatment. If my subject's in the shade, if it's really noisy, I'll denoise it. In this particular case, it doesn't really need denoising, but just a little bit of emphasis. If I take a brush here and with low feathering, and I'm just going to do a quick paint here, just a little bit. I add a little bit of, move the temperature slider to the right, a little bit of exposure maybe. And because these eyes are big and beautiful, a little bit of clarity maybe will look good as well. Then you back up to see whether or not it's too much. And if it is too much, you just go back here and tone it down a little bit. Now, again, I mentioned the subject was kind of, the background was too bright and the foreground, the subject is too dark. So I'm going to go and make a background mask here, and I'm going to lower the whites on the background to just kind of tame the exposure in the background. But yeah, as you can see, when I do that, it kind of makes the background kind of muddy and not very pretty here. What you can do is change the color temperature by moving the temperature slider to the right. So see over here, I've got the temperature slider. I'm moving that to the right a little bit and I'm adding a bit of color, because what happens is this background was bright. I darkened it, and by darkening, I just kind of brought the saturation down, and that didn't look very good. So I'm going to darken that, and I'm going to add some color temperature to kind of warm up that background, and it's going to look very good with the warm subject. Something I like to do as well sometimes with a linear gradient, drag it up from the bottom here and lower the exposure a bit. I like to darken my foregrounds a bit just to keep the people looking up here. And I might do the same thing, select a linear gradient from the top. And if I notice, if I do it this way, it'll darken the subject as well. What you do is you right click on your mask, intersect mask with background, and it creates a mask, if you see here, that's hidden behind my subject. And then maybe darken the top of the image a little bit here as well. So this is a quick before and after. And basically, the problem here was the fact the background was too bright, the foreground and the subject was too dark. I brightened the subject, darkened the background using masks for both the subject and the background, tidied up the eyes a bit, got those whites up again, and that gives you a quick sense of what a quick before and after. And that image that was pretty dull on the front, on the right end, I've made a big print of this. Canon actually made a big print for me for a trade show using this exact image cropped in from my R1 that I'd taken it with. And after they used it for the trade show, they sent it to me actually, which was very nice of them. I didn't even know it was coming. It was quite a surprise. So there is an example of what you can do with something like that. Let's move on to another photo. And I know I'm going quickly. It's just we don't have a lot of time to explain every move, but giving you a sense here. Here is a beautiful wood duck. Background has fall leaves. Everything was perfect, except I'm on a rock about 3 feet by 3 feet. That's a meter by a meter. And there was no way to get lower without putting the lens down on my boot. And I was using a 5D Mark IV with no flippy screen and no eye detect. And I was eyeballing it by aiming, by looking at the back LCD, even though I was kneeling and the camera was 2 feet below my head. So I wasn't aiming very accurately. But if I take a crop like this, you'll notice this has the bones of a good photo, but it's pretty dull looking. So you can see here, you know, this looks really nice. There's lots of detail here. And lots of detail on the wings and so on. But the head here is really, really dark and not at its best. So what can we do here? Number one, it is underexposed, so we can raise the exposure. A tip for you, by the way, if you hit Alt, that would be Option on a Mac, and move the exposure slider. You see here, it'll show you when you clip. It'll show, if you move the whites or the exposure, it'll show you if you're blowing out. See here, I'm blowing up my whites. It'll show you where you're blowing out your whites. So if you want to raise the exposure, you want to make sure you're not blowing anything, hit Alt on a PC, Option on a Mac. So I'm going to raise the exposure here. I can do the, and we're going to do some similar tricks we did to the first photo. I'm going to make select a subject mask, and I'm going to raise the exposure. But again, if you do it too much, it's obviously not going to look very good there. So I'm going to raise the exposure a bit. On something like this with these beautiful feathers in the wings, adding some clarity is probably going to work. See how it's going to, clarity is going to make those pop, but it is making the image darker. So I might have to raise the shadows a bit. I am going to raise the saturation a bit on my subject. Now, in particular, the head here, let me just back this up a little bit here, make it a bit more modest crop. The head here really should be really nice. So what you can do, I can make a subject mask and a right click, intersect mask with a brush, and I can just brush here. And as you can see, you know, it's really selecting the head quite well. And specifically, I'm going to raise the shadows on the head, try to get some of those beautiful colors without affecting all the other parts of the image here. And as you can see, there's some beautiful drops on top of the head here a bit. And it is introducing a bit of noise. I can fix that later with a bit of noise reduction, and we'll do that in a second. Again, I'm going to select the background here, and the background's not too bad, except it's a bit dull. I'm actually going to raise the exposure, and again, as I did earlier, see how I can move the temperature slider to the right and add some nice color to it. I'm going to do like I did earlier, just for style. If I take a linear gradient from the bottom, push it up, darken the foreground just a little bit. I like a dark foreground usually to help draw the eye. By the way, if your images are ever really in bad shape from a noise perspective, especially in the background where the noise is usually easier to see, rather than using noise reduction here globally and just mushing up all the image at the same time, what you can do is once you select your background, run noise reduction on the background and not all of the subject. Sorry, I'm trying to find the noise reduction here. And the same thing with sharpness. Add sharpness to your subject, not the background. So use a subject mask for that. And by the way, for sharpening, a tip that everyone should know, when you're sharpening, see the sharpening slider here? See the masking slider? Hit Alt, that would be Option on a Mac, and adjust the masking slider. And the parts in white will be sharpened and the parts in black won't. And that makes a beautiful distinction here in that you're not sharpening the background. The background is usually where the noise, because it's homogeneous, the background will show up the noise. So hit Alt on your keyboard, Option on a Mac, slide the masking slider so that the sharpening only applies to your subject. And sometimes here I will also add a little bit of maybe a little bit of a vignette just to draw the eye a little bit more inwards. So here again, a before and after, we just brighten up the colors, raise the shadows in parts that had some color and wasn't showing up, warmed up the background to make it pop a little bit more. And we've got a little bit of that as well. So there's a couple of choices. I'm gonna take a 2-second interlude here to mention something that my friend Bill just mentioned. And it is that, oh, Bill, is this showing full screen?
I'm not seeing anything on screen at the moment.
You're not, okay. Hold on.
Just your lovely mug.
Oh, thank you so much.
We'll want to get rid of that quickly.
Yes, absolutely. How about now?
Yes, now I am seeing your screen.
We're in business. Is that full screen?
That is now full screen on the
Okay.
Wildlife Photography Essentials.
Very quick interlude. For those who might know, and many people are here, I have a wildlife photography course, Wildlife Photo Essentials. We've got hundreds of people who have taken the course. They're having a great time, and they tell me they do, and it's helping them with their photography. I've been spending all winter working on another course, which is Wildlife Photo Processing Essentials. So basically, a wildlife photo processing course for using Lightroom Classic, like we're doing here tonight. And basically, I really focused on making artful photos, something you're proud to hang on a wall. And this course has twice as long content as my first course. This has 10 hours of video. So Bill says, I've been working all winter. I've been working all winter. I've got 25 modules of instruction. I got 4 bonus modules, including one, for example, on how to buy a computer and a monitor and how to set them up to use Lightroom Classic. And the course really starts all the way from the beginning for people who want to learn Lightroom for the first time to all the way to people who want to use much more advanced techniques. So if you're just starting on Lightroom, we'll start you at the beginning. If you're more advanced, you might want to start at module 4 or something like that. So what am I going to cover in the course? We're really going to go through all the fundamentals of Lightroom and how it works, including things like libraries and modules and workflow. People actually ask lots of questions about that, like importing and culling and catalogs and storage. But then we're going to go into exposure sliders, white balance, cloning, cropping, using masks, color grading, sharpening, noise reduction. And then we're going to put all this into use. I'm going to give you guys whoever buys the course, 25 raw files of mine, actual photos, and you can work in the course with me on my own files, and I'll show you my workflow and how I've designed a simplified workflow, how to make your subjects really pop, how to clean up that background using light gradients. I'm going to show my sandwich technique, which is really cool. People like it. How to process in black and white, how to make desaturated images, how to process backlit images, how to deal with haze. Like if you're shooting Mount Kilimanjaro behind some elephants in Ambassador, sometimes there's so much haze in the air you can hardly see the mountain. I'll show you how to reveal the mountain behind the elephants. Exporting for web and print, how to use a histogram, and some tricks with presets as well. So what are you going to learn? How to process either your photos for accuracy, if that's what's important. If you're a birder and you want that dark-eyed junco to have dark eyes. So I'll show you how to process for accuracy or make wildlife art. How to process your photos so they stand out, how to rescue, like we're doing tonight, rescue images that you thought weren't worth saving, how to come up with an efficient workflow that's simple and yet effective, a whole bunch of shortcuts and tricks, how to store your photos, albums, catalogs, the whole thing. And what are the best export settings for social media and printing so they get tack sharp photos. So how much does the course cost? Regular price is $497 US for all 29 modules, 10 hours of content. But we've got an introductory price of $100 off for the next 24 hours at $397. And if you bought my first course, we'll give you $150 off. So $347 if you bought my first course. If you want to buy both courses, get in touch with us. We'll give you a deal on a 2-course bundle. And all the course participants in the first 30 days who buy the course, I'm going to invite them to a portfolio review. I'll have a whole bunch of people send in some photos. I'll pick a bunch of them and I'll do some portfolio reviews and maybe some processing. And at that event, I'll pick 3 people out of that group to do one-on-one portfolio reviews at an event where I'll bring the 3 people in and we'll just talk, just the 3 of us. So if you want your photos to go from something like this to something like this, and this to this, from this to this, and maybe, you know, some of those examples are maybe a bit, you're thinking over the top. Sometimes you just want to make your photos just nicer, not crazy like this beautiful warbler. Maybe you just want it to look like this rather than this. Not too crazy, just nice, you know? And I'll even show you some black and white tricks as well. So that is, I'll stop the share for 2 seconds and I'll do, since I've got you, I'm relaunching my print store. I've got a video coming out tomorrow on how to make an online print store, and I'll show you, and I'll actually on social media, I'll be giving this print and a bunch of others away because I'm relaunching my print store on fine art paper. And if you want to learn how to process photos like this to sell as prints, my course would be great for that too. So Bill, over to you. Maybe do we want to put up a link?
Yeah, the link's been put up. Maybe Natalia can put it up again because it's been scrolling through. 2 things I wanted to mention. You mentioned the sale for the $100 off is for the next 24 hours. Your screen said 48, and 48 is the correct number. And then we had people asking, hey, I use Lightroom, not Lightroom Classic. Is this course still okay for me?
Lightroom, if you're using Lightroom, the mobile version, you know, 75% of it, I will say you can just easily apply. A lot of stuff about workflow and catalogs and stuff will be different. And not all of the features that are available in one are available in the other, but a lot are. And Lightroom Mobile is catching up to Lightroom Classic in that they keep adding more features. So I think within a few years, they'll almost be the same.
Very good. That's all we have.
Yeah. How applicable is it to Photoshop? I think in Photoshop, all of those tools are available in Photoshop. You just got to access them differently. And I do have a bonus module with 2 tricks in Photoshop that you can't do in Lightroom, which is using the tilt shift feature and adding canvas in Lightroom if you've cut the wings off of the end of your, or you don't have enough canvas for the crop that you want. If someone is asking, what if I don't have Photoshop or Lightroom? Some of the theoretical things I do and the way I explain them, you could use another software and say, hey, Simon's idea here, I can find a way to apply it here, but it'll be a lot more challenging to do so, I guess.
All right. Back to our original scheduled program.
Our regularly scheduled program. And I have to go here to back to Lightroom. Is Lightroom back up here, Bill?
Yes, it is.
Okay, let's go. I want to leave room for a couple of extra things here. So I'm going to pass over actually my razor bill. Got a nice razor bill coming in. You know what? I'm going to do the 1-minute version on the razor bill. This was shot, there's just the light was just flat. You know, this kind of overcast day, bright overcast. I had plenty of shutter speed. This is a puffin here in the water. I'll take this puffin out. I just want to give you the brief overview of a technique that you can do. And it's that the background here is just flat. It's uniform. there's no color to it. There's no light to it. It's bland and it's featureless. And it's undermining how pretty a bird with a beautiful pose, you know, these razorbills come into land, they open up the wings, they open up the tail, they open up their webbed feet to apply air brakes. And it's beautiful, but the background is really undermining this photo. So I'm going to do a background selection here. And I'm going to show you a trick. Is do a right click, intersect mask with a linear gradient. And what I'm going to do this. And you see it's behind. I did a linear gradient and I intersected it with a background. So it's behind the bird. And then I'm going to brighten up one part of the background. And what you can do the same thing with a linear gradient on the bottom. Again, right click, intersect mask with background, darken that a little bit. And then I'm going to make a selection of all of the background. When you're dealing with dull images, dull photos, the white balance is often a problem. And right here, we've got this white balance that's a bit too warm and it's just kind of making the image blah. But if I take the white balance and move it left, and basically cold scenes look nice blue and water scenes look nice and blue. So you can move the white balance left and do something like this. So this was a 1 minute edit of just adding a bit of a light gradient, making part of the image brighter and part of the image darker and changing the white balance. And you can see it really changes things. I can do other things, like when I've selected the background, I can knock the clarity down and make the background softer. There's a few different things you can do here, but basically this is the quick edit on select the background, put a bit of a light gradient in it to make part of it brighter, part of it darker, and adjust the white balance a bit. And look, you can do a lot in 1 minute. So I'm doing that one quickly because I want to leave some room for, here's another one where you can do something similar. Here, this is a robin shot super early morning. The light was coming in from the left-hand side, but you can't tell. You can tell on the bird that the light was coming in from the left-hand side, but you can't from the background. So if we do the same trick I just did, select the background, right click, intersect mask with a linear gradient, and add a gradient from the direction from, and this is important. If you're doing this trick on a bird that had some light on it, make sure you add the light from the direction that on the bird, that the bird is lit, right? So I could do that a bit. The whole scene is too cold. This was early morning. Look how beautiful that is when I warm that up. So, and again, kind of brighten up one side of the image here a little bit. You could do the same thing here. Just to note here, see how blue this, you can do a select object, by the way, mask in Lightroom now. I mean, we used to spend, Bill and I, 10 years ago in Photoshop or even in Lightroom, we used to spend 20 minutes painting with a brush, something like this log. And let me just move the white balance a bit to the right so it's not so blue, for example. And something you can do as well, you can do this on the subject. So if I do a select subject, and this is to show you the power of intersecting mask. I spent a lot of time on intersecting masks in my course. Intersect mask with a radial gradient and see what happens. See what happens with an intersecting mask. Look at how powerful that is. We used to spend in Photoshop and Lightroom, we used to spend half an hour, painting this painstakingly. So now I can raise the shadows, raise the black, get some more exposure on this right-hand side of this robin, lower the highlights so I don't blow them out a bit. And same thing here. If I do a select object, select this, and then I'm going to right click, intersect mask with a linear gradient, and I'm going to do this and see how it's lighting up that side. Now I'm going to brighten it up and warm it up. I'm going to move to show that light that's coming from that left-hand side. I'm going to warm up the whole thing a bit more. And there's a quick before and after. The photo on the left, good subject, nice pose, you know, some light to it. It's just dull and just needed a bit of pop. So as you can see, I did that in 5 minutes. Now I've got 2 other examples. I want to show you a different strategy. So my original strategy was the subject's too dark. You got to brighten the subject or reveal the light a bit more. Maybe make the shadows darker and the lights lighter on a subject in the shade. I'm going to give you another example. When you have a subject that's dull, just like dull, there's nothing going on. This was a cloudy day. I'm out in the Okavango Delta in Botswana. I got these 2 zebras here, something like this. And this just looks flat, you know, it's just not that exciting. When you've got something that the light is really flat, like I can try to crank up the vibrance here, but to make it pretty, but look what happens. Like that's not very pretty. The zebras go blue and the background is a yucky yellow and green. That doesn't work. Another option is to go black and white. So I'm going to go black and white on this image. Why don't we do something like this? I'm going to, for some reason, I want this long horizontal crop. So we've got to get this guy out of here. By the way, cropping like this is not allowed for wildlife photo contest. And that's something I spent quite a bit of time talking about in my course is some of these tools, like if I want to do a crop here, this heal tool, you can't crop things out of an image for a wildlife photo contest. But just so you know, I can't use a remove tool to remove that. But in a wildlife photo contest, you can crop out something like this. So in my course, I explain what's allowed and what's not allowed. And some of these tools here, for example, this one here, this remove tool uses AI, and AI is not allowed in wildlife photo contest either. So all the tools, the ones that you can and can't use in contest, I point those out to make sure no one gets caught. Plus as well now, Instagram and Facebook have AI detection tools. And if they detect that you've used some of these AI-based tools, they'll point it out to everyone. So again, back to dull and lifeless. Go black and white. And again, I showed you earlier, try to make the background and the surroundings a bit more dynamic. You can do something as simple as darken that foreground and, oops, hold on. Sorry, something went wrong there. Linear gradient on top. Darken the background a bit. And rather than have a photo that's really crappy colors, not much going on, you can do something artistic with it like this. And just give it a bit more dynamic surrounding rather than being too flat. And if it's not going to be pretty from a color perspective, then black and white can be good. And here you might make a special mask for the subject. And again, the highlights, I think, and the whites are a bit flat here. And you can add a bit of clarity to make them pop in the frame here. So there's something you can do. And then finally, I got another photo here. I'm going to show you another example of what you can do when your photos are dull and lifeless. So this photo here of a line, let me press I. If you press I in your keyboard, it will show you your settings. Look at this, 1/130th of a second, ISO 3200. So this was like 15 minutes before sunrise. There was no light. And at 1/30th of a second, are my photos all sharp? No, they're not. You shoot, and then some of them will come out sharp. You only need one. But in this photo here, I shot it, it's really dark, it's underexposed because I shot it as I saw it. The scene was quite dark, it was before sunrise. If I try to raise the shadows on this and raise the vibrance on it, to try to make it look good. I don't like that at all, actually. I find the colors look crappy and it's noisy and it just doesn't look attractive. So we're going to try a different approach. This is my desaturated strategy, which I do mention in my course, actually, how to do this. So sometimes the light is crap. Rather than trying to make pretty light with it, I say go for a desaturated, grungier look. So let's brighten this a bit because it is dark. And I mentioned that I do like having a little bit of a gradient maybe from the bottom just to make, you know, I'll do a right click, intersect mask with background just to make sure I'm not darkening the legs of the lion too much. Darken that a little bit. Now, what we can do as well is, let's see here. Let's go. I'm going to take a radial gradient. I'll show you another trick for making that kind of light and an airy look. The right click, intersect mask with the background. So this mask here is going to be behind my subject here. I'll put it up top here. And I'll just raise the exposure and see how I make that little kind of little glow. I'm going to stretch this out a bit and just do something like this. Now that, though, doesn't maybe look like much, but look at this technique. I'm going to take the vibrant slider, which everyone likes to crank to the right and go crazy. I'm going to go left and look what I'm doing. I'm giving this kind of desaturated, grungy look. Now, a couple other things. Let's look at the subject itself. We're going to look at the subject here, and what works with this desaturated look is kind of a grungy look. So I'm going to move the contrast slider to the right. I'm going to move the clarity slider a bit to the right. I'm going to, let's see, raise the highlights a bit and lower the shadows maybe. No, I'm going to raise the shadows. I don't want this part here to become too dark. Let's desaturate the line a bit more. So we've gone for a little bit more grungy look. Something I do as well, there's nothing to do with dull photos, is see how the grass is in focus at its feet. I like to take a radial gradient and put it across the in focus area and raise the clarity and see how it's going to make the grass pop and be more visible in the in focus slice that's at its feet. I like to do that a little bit. And what else can we do here? This photo, as you can see, it's going to be noisy. You know, it was underexposed, ISO 3200 underexposed by a stop. So that's ISO 6400, and we're cropping in a lot. Let's do the eyes. Again, hit Control and then slide the mouse. You can get a bit of zoom. That would be Command on a Mac. And I've got a preset here, Simon's Eye Touch Up for a brush. So take a brush, Simon's Eye Touch Up here. I've saved as a preset. In my course, I show you how to make presets and save them. And oops, Simon's Eye Touch Up. And here, what I've got in here is a bit of exposure, bit of warming up the white balance, and a bit of noise reduction, because eyes are glossy in real life. But when they're underexposed, they get kind of noisy and they'll lose some of their glossy look. And then a second brush, darkening the exposure on the pupil a bit. And then what those two things do, I'll darken that a bit. And what those two things do in concert is just make the eyes pop just a little bit more. But don't do it till it's too obvious. And again, is that the right amount of vibrance reduction? And by the way, vibrance versus saturation. I use vibrance more than saturation because saturation increases or decreases all the colors at the same time. The vibrance slider, when you move it to the right, increases the less saturated colors more. So it's kind of a catch-up slider, but it helps you not go bonkers on raising the saturation of colors that are already have enough saturation. So in this particular case, going backwards, both of these would work. And there we go. I'm going to add a little bit of vignette. I might go back to that upper thing here and just, you can lower the contrast as well in the background when you're making these little kind of bright spots. And there we go, before and after. So, you know, that photo on the left, it was okay, but you know, trying to make it pretty with more colors and so on is not always going to work. If you have a photo that doesn't have great colors because it was shot in super low light, and maybe you're using a smaller sensor camera that's struggling even more, you know, consider desaturated or black and white as a way to salvage a photo from, you know, trying to solve it and fix it by adding exposure and adding color. Now, obviously, this is a more artistic interpretation, and this is not for everyone, and that's fine. I'll never tell anyone how to process their photos. My job is to give you options and then let you choose what you want. And if you want to, you know, if you want to process your photos for naturalistic accuracy, 100% respect doing that, because maybe you want to do wildlife conservation support, or you want to help your local non-governmental organization and so on. And doing the artsy version like this might not be what works, but doing this might also work for selling a print. I've got this print process like I just showed you here next to my fireplace in acrylic. And it's beautiful. Even though it's, you know, shot in crappy light and all that fun stuff, I like the desaturated look in my living room. It looks good. So, you know what, Bill? I'm always conscious about time, and I do want to leave some time for question and answers. So I'm going to stop sharing and take some questions from anyone who's got them.
All right. And I got finger cramps. I got so many questions coming in. I'm writing them all down as quick as I can. And for one, before some people have to leave, we had people asking about the pricing for the 2-course bundle. How do I take advantage of that? Please write support@jowp.com, and they will get back to you right away with that pricing and a link that you can go to. All right, let's get to questions here. Chris says, I've edited my photos and they look great on screen, but when I send them to a printer, they come back dull and lifeless. What am I doing wrong?
Okay. The number one problem people make in sending stuff to the printer is that their computer screen is too bright. Your photo on your computer screen backlit is way brighter on your computer than a printed piece of paper. And the problem is, you've got your computer screen wide open at 100% brightness, and when you send it to the printer, it actually comes out a stop and a half darker than what you had. And because you think your computer screen is bright, you think the photo is bright enough, but it's actually in real life really dark. So when you process photos for printing, you have to add maybe 3/4 of a stop of brightness. Don't clip out your whites, but make it brighter. The other thing is, make sure you've got your color profiles right. You can send photos to the printer in JPEG, no problem. If you send them in Adobe RGB, might even be better. Don't send them in ProPhoto. I don't recommend. ProPhoto is actually the widest color gamut, the most pro one. But if you send it to a shop that doesn't know how to handle that, you may end up getting crappy results. But the brightness by far is the number one problem that people run into.
Simone, did you want to mention calibration of monitor?
I can, and thank you. I talk about it in my course, so
throw up your spider.
I've got a spider here somewhere, and I just can't find it. So I have a little device, which I can't find it. I have a little device that you hang over. It's called a spider with a Y, made by Datarite, I think, or Datacolor. And you hang it over the screen and you run a calibration routine, and it will calibrate your monitor. Now, not all monitors are calibratable to a wide extent, but Both Windows and iOS, the operating system for Mac, has a monitor calibration device or routine built in. Run that at a minimum, and it'll help you set your contrast and your brightness and your color balance accurate. So you can do that at a minimum. But for professional printing work, you should get your monitor calibrated. And for super pro work, you should develop an ICC profile, which is something you spit out of your computer and you send it to your pro shop, your printing shop, and the printing shop will install that into the printer, and the printer will know exactly how to make it look like you wanted it to come out on your computer.
Okay. I don't want Chris to think we're not answering his question. He asked this before you introduced your course. So he said, are there any good resources available on the topic we're covering tonight? And I think we've answered that one.
Ta-da! I got 6 or 7 YouTube videos on Lightroom. I've got a playlist on processing as well that includes a few more of these types of tips.
Excellent. Lane wanted to know, how does Lightroom Classic differ from Lightroom?
Lightroom Classic is what used to be just called Lightroom. The naming thing has just driven everyone crazy. It used to be called Lightroom, and then Adobe created Lightroom, the mobile version, which they changed the name to call that Lightroom. And they rechanged the old one to be called Lightroom Classic. The mobile version has fewer features. It's designed to be used on a phone or an iPad. I use it on an iPad Pro. It stores your images in the cloud by default rather than storing it on SSDs or network attached storage. And it has fewer features, and it's designed to be used. I use a pen. I tried using a mouse with it. I didn't like it. The pen for my iPad Pro was the way to go. And it has fewer features, but every iteration, they're adding a bunch of features. So it's catching up feature-wise, but it's very quick, very efficient, and is handy to use. So when I travel to Africa, I don't bring my big laptop. I bring an iPad Pro, and I've got Lightroom, not Classic, the mobile version of Lightroom installed on that, and that's what I use.
Okay, so this will take us into Russ's question, because he said, I started using Lightroom. Do you recommend that I switch to Lightroom Classic and rip the Band-Aid off? I don't use the mobile features.
It depends. I like sitting at my laptop. When I've got the choice, I like sitting at my laptop. I like using a mouse. I've got a mouse with a scroll wheel on it, and I've got buttons programmed on the sides for things. And for me, just the shortcuts and everything I've trained my brain, like Control Z is undo on my laptop. And I use that 60 times per day, and it's much easier than a bunch of other stuff. So I'm just kind of used to the workflow. If you're not used to the PC workflow, I'm not sure you need to switch to it.
Okay. We had a few people asking, so I'll combine this with Anthony and Philip and a few others who asked this question, and it's kind of along the lines of Topaz versus Lightroom for denoise, sharpening, some of those features that both have.
I have a conflict. I have a commercial arrangement with Topaz. I like Topaz. Topaz and Lightroom. The Lightroom version's pretty good. I find it slower. It's not a big deal for a wildlife photographer, but if you were a wedding photographer and you were trying to denoise 200 photos from a wedding, in Lightroom would take you quite a while. Topaz, I find, is faster. I find Topaz more controllable. I've got more options to tweak it. The Lightroom one, you've only got a couple of sliders, and you got 10 or 20 in the Topaz. The best thing about Topaz, unfortunately, they don't sell Topaz denoise anymore. They sell the Topaz AI that has denoise, sharpening, and upscaling gigapixel in it. The best feature was the Topaz denoise had a resharpening slider after you denoise to add some sharpness back. The resharpening slider in denoise is the best sharpener I've ever seen. And I can still use it because I have the original Topaz denoise, but you can't get it anymore. I hate to say.
Yeah, I have it too.
The resharpening slider in denoise is the best sharpener I've ever found.
Yeah, I kept it around.
Yeah, okay. and if you're asking why do you want something like Topaz denoise, if you sharpen the whole image, you're going to sharpen the noise in the background that's more easily seen. And if you denoise the whole image, you're going to denoise the detail in your subject. Now, I could show you in Lightroom, and I show you in the course. Sorry, I'm going to keep pitching the course, I guess. But I guess because I am showing, in the course, I show you the best technique. You got 3 techniques. The best technique is to denoise the background, sharpen the subject, both separately. Or if you use something like Lightroom AI or the Topaz, it does this automatically. It picks out the background and denoises it. It picks out your subject and he sharpens it. And the beauty is, if you've got a fox with whiskers sticking out on the end, old, unsophisticated denoising algorithms, you try to denoise it and the whiskers that are in the background, going through the background, it'll get soft too. But with these new, stuff like Topaz and Lightroom AI, if you denoise this, it'll denoise the background and the whisker that's sticking out into the background stays sharp. That's the trick of that. That's why that works. And now, again, some of these denoising algorithms may trigger non-compliance in photo contests. And what they do now, a lot of photo contests will run your photo through an AI finding program. And if it thinks you've used AI, it'll say AI found, and they'll disqualify your image. So you have to be cautious.
Very good. Cynthia wanted to know, what are your thoughts on establishing the white point and the black point first before doing any other adjustments?
It's not a bad strategy to just get a sense of where you are. There is a technique that's used amongst many. I tend not to use it, but I think I used it at the beginning, but now I've learned to eyeball things. When you're in doubt about your levels, if you press Alt on a PC, that would be Option on a Mac, and then slide the white slider and the dark slider. What you do, you press Alt, and then you move the white slider until you clip. It'll show the clipping, and then pull it back. And then take your black slider and move it left until you clip the blacks, and then pull it back. So what you've done there, you've moved the whites almost to pure white and the blacks almost to pure black. And what you've done is you've maximized the dynamic range in your photo. That is not a bad approach. And it's used in many genres. Make the whites as white as you can without blowing them out. Make the blacks as black as you can. The reality is, though, there's some photos where that's not going to work very well. Some photos don't need white whites and don't need black blacks for artistic reasons. But starting there, it's a good strategy.
Okay. Philip asked, and you kind of went through this in one of your examples, but what do you do when the belly of the bird is dark, but the sky around the bird in flight is very bright? What are you doing in that edit?
I think similar to what I did like with the leopard, raise the shadows in your subject and lower the brightness of the background. And of course, in backlit, shooting a bird flying overhead against a bright sky, you're going to get a lot of that. So you just got to find a way to do it in a way that still looks natural. Sometimes when you've got a shadowy part of your subject, there's more noise in the shadows than there is in bright parts of the image. And if you've got a dark, shadowy, and you shot it at high ISO, when you try to raise the shadows too much, you'll reveal a lot of the noise. So just be cautious not to make your image worse by raising the shadows so much that you're just revealing that it's noisy there.
Got it. Robin asked, is there a manual to go with the course that can be referenced periodically?
There's not, but the video stuff, you can keep watching it as many times as you want.
Yeah, that's kind of where I went in my head. You can go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth as much as you want. And because you provide those raw images, you can be editing them on your screen while you're watching the video on your tablet, right?
And that's what I'm hoping people will do. And that way, I'm an experiential learner. When I do it, if I want to learn the driving directions to somewhere new, I can't sit in the passenger seat and learn how to get there. You got to drive.
Yeah, exactly. James said, could you have used a sepia tone on the zebra image that you were referencing?
Absolutely. Yeah, that could. I've never been a super sepia guy, but there's nothing wrong with artistic interpretations from a color perspective. Basically, my general strategy is warm looks good on hot, sunny, lit, and blue looks better when it's cold, when it's winter. So if your images of something in winter in the snow, making it a bit bluer by moving a temperature slider to the left. And people might think, and I mentioned this, people might think that playing with color temperature sliders is cheating. Like in television and movies, this is done every day. The next time you watch Game of Thrones, when they're in King's Landing in the warm south, the scenes are super orange, and when they're in the north at the wall in the snow, everything is super blue. That you've seen this in movies a million times.
Okay. Tony wanted to know, are updates to the course free? And I guess the question would be, how often do we update? Because Lightroom updates, you might want to cover that.
Yeah, they will be free. I won't sell updates. A couple of updates later down the road, if they add a really nice new feature that's really relevant. If it's a new eye detection for people, it's not worth updating because it's not going to affect you. But if there are relevant updates or big updates, I'll make update modules and provide them for free. And I did, for example, in my previous course that's less than 2 years old, I made a bonus module on how to find wildlife to photograph and just threw it in as a freebie to people who had signed up for the course.
Very generous. Bob wanted to know, when might you use dehaze or not? What's the right time to use it?
I can give you 2 quick examples. One is, as I mentioned, I shot this really nice group of elephants in Ambassador passing in front of Mount Kilimanjaro. It was great, except there was so much friggin' haze in the air because the dust and humidity in the air, when it's fully lit, it turns it gray. You could just barely see Mount Kilimanjaro. If you put a filter on the background and limit it to the sky and use the dehaze slider, Mount Kilimanjaro will come out. Now, the problem is it raises a bunch of artifacts. It makes the white balance go wacky and stuff. So a lot of the problem with doing that is figuring out how to solve the artifacts. I mentioned that in the course. Now, the other great place to use dehaze for everyone here, if you go to a wildlife park where there's fences, those kind of just wire fences, and the best way to get the fence not to be obstructing the image is get your lens as close to the fence as you can and shoot the lens as wide open as you can. And if you can get right up against the fence, often you won't see the fence, but it will be so out of focus that the bands of metal, it'll create this haze over your photo. And what you do is you crank the dehaze slider and the haze will go away. So you can shoot through a fence. If you can get close enough and get it out of focus enough, even takes your lens hood off if you can, to get the front element as close as you can to the metal fence, even if there's got these little pieces going through your lens or through your image. Slide the dehaze slider right. Now it will oversaturate your image, so be ready to move the saturation slider left to compensate, but you can shoot through a fence and come up with a decent image. So at a wildlife park would be a great example where you use that.
Great tip. Stephen wanted to know, when in the workflow is the best time to sharpen and denoise? I've heard that should be done at the beginning.
I've heard it all. Topaz recommends doing it at the beginning on the raw file, and that you'll get best results. But I've done it at the end and never noticed a difference. I will say sharpening should always be done last, after resizing. Sharpening is super size and dimension dependent. The algorithm needs to know how big the image is. If you take an image this big, sharpen it, and then crop it to this big and resize it, your sharpening is totally useless. You have to resharpen at the end. So, and I've always gotten used to denoising at the end. So I denoise and sharpen last. And I crop first. And I crop first because for me, knowing whether or not I have a print that's worth hanging on a wall, it depends on the composition. And some photos, I've got photos of beautiful subjects, but I just can't find a way to crop it that looks attractive. And I'll leave it on my computer unprocessed because I can't find an attractive crop and composition. So a big part of cropping is cropping for composition. And so I crop first and sharpen last.
All right. Mary said, do you ever change your photo profile, color, landscape, etc.?
Great question. I think that's a useful tool, but I don't use it. So in Lightroom, there are color profiles. There's Adobe Standard, Adobe Color, and then you can get into things like Adobe Landscape and Portrait. What these does, it decodes the raw file from scratch in a different algorithm. For example, if I was a portrait photographer, I'd probably use Adobe Portrait, because what it does in portraiture, you don't want really sharp skin. You want it to be nice and soft and glowy. So the Adobe Portrait profile actually lowers the sharpening of your photo to make it nice and soft. So, and landscape, the landscape format adds blues and greens. So I don't use it just because I've gotten my eyes. I look at a photo now and says, oh, there's too much magenta in that. And you know what? I used to laugh. I remember 6, 7, 8 years ago looking at YouTube videos, and this person would say, oh, there's too much magenta in that image. And I remember thinking to myself, how would you ever know there's too much magenta in an image? But actually, after a while, you can train yourself. So I do all my color selections manually, but there's nothing wrong with playing around with color profiles as a different starting point.
Okay. Well, that brings us into Hunter's question. Ever use the color select adjuster?
I do. And for a few different reasons. Sometimes I do it artistically. Sometimes I do it scientifically. For example, I showed you that leopard under a tree. If your white balance would have been a little bit off and you underexposed that breast, the breast would have been blue. Now, blue, interestingly enough, in that photo, there was no other blue anywhere else. So if you go to the color picker, take blue and desaturate it, all that blue would disappear. So I will selectively remove a color like blue that doesn't belong there, or magenta, or if there's a purple fringe on something, I'll selectively do that. The other thing I'll do sometimes is I will play with the hue a bit. I've seen photos where the green just had too much yellow in it and it just didn't work, and I just reduced the yellow a bit and the green gets a different green and I like it better. So yes, I will do that. Again, more for artistic interpretation. You know, I wouldn't do that for a wildlife, for a photo contest or something like that. Although you can do a little bit if it's not too crazy. You can do color adjustments and you can make things lighter and darker and sharpen and do noise reduction if it's not too crazy. So I do a little bit of it selectively here and there.
Very good. Francesco said, when I create a mask of something, usually the resultant mask is not very precise. Is there a way to fix this?
There are ways to tinker with masks. It depends. In Lightroom, for example, there's more tinkering on masks that are there's a luminosity mask where you can pick the brightness of something, like only bright areas. And there's a color mask where you can pick specific colors. And there are sliders to feather the mask on both ends. So you can play, if you've got a bright spot and you try to select that, you can feather the edges of the bright spot to what you want. Where it gets hard is when you've got like a fox with some fur and you're trying to select the fox and sometimes the fur won't get selected accurately. So you can, under each of these masks, there's a plus and minus button. You can plus and add to the mask and hit minus and subtract from the mask. And sometimes you can subtract, you can clean up the mask by subtracting bright spots or adding dark spots, depending on the difference between your subject and the background. But the cleaner your background, the easier it is to differentiate them. When there's a bunch of sticks and stuff in the background, it does get hard.
Okay, and that ties kind of into what Lucas is asking here. Any tips on how to mask edit more fine areas like whiskers, feathers, fur that masking might miss or cause a halo effect?
Those can get tough. Sometimes, like if you've got a white whisker, then try a luminosity mask that picks white rather than trying to pick the whisker. The object mask can do a decent job. I've painted whiskers and fence post and stuff like that with the object mask, Now you need to do them one at a time, so that is a bit of a pain. And when there's a ghosting effect or a halo effect, try playing with the contrast and clarity sliders, including reducing clarity or adding clarity. Adding clarity sometimes will lessen the halo by sharpening it down a bit. So those are a few different things. Or you can try to pick the background behind your mask and play with the clarity and contrast sliders and the texture slider as well, and see if you can reduce any overlap or hazy areas in between the two.
Okay. Steve had a question from a technology standpoint. Does Photoshop or Lightroom offer better advantages? And I know in your course you actually added in the Lightroom course modules for Photoshop, so there must be some reason that Photoshop gets used by Simon d'Entremont at some point in his process.
Yeah, you know what? A lot less than I used to. Lightroom just gets better and better. Like 5 or 6 years ago, I would go to Photoshop often enough. I use Lightroom 97% of the time now. I don't lose Photoshop a lot, but there's a few things Photoshop does. For example, let's say you got your bird and you've cropped the top of the frame. You've got no framed for a composition. You can add canvas in Photoshop, which I show you in the course. And I use Photoshop for Milky Way photos and stuff because I need to use layers. But you don't need to as much anymore. There's even a blur tool for the background in Lightroom now that you used to use Photoshop to, if you wanted to manually blur your background, which I don't really do a lot. I'm lucky I've got, a 600mm f4 will blow out the background a lot. So there are a few things that Photoshop can do, but there's less reason than ever for a Lightroom user to take up Photoshop. But most people end up with Photoshop and Lightroom in a bundle. A lot of people in Canada, you get your Lightroom, Photoshop comes with it for your monthly membership. So it's handy to have a couple of things there you can go and use, but Photoshop proficiency is not required.
Yeah. Okay, good. We had a few people asking about Adobe Adaptive Color Profiles or black and white profiles. Do you use those? How are they used?
No, I don't like them a lot. I don't think I've ever used any of the Lightroom presets and so on. A good one, I don't use it much anymore, but I remember when I started using it, I was quite impressed. The Nick collection. I don't know who owns that anymore. It's changed hands a few times.
DxO.
DxO owns it. The Nick collection from DxO, the black and white profiles in there were really, really good.
They're even better now in version 8. I use them.
Wow. So I haven't used that in years, to be honest. I should look that over again because they were quite good. And they had some split toning things for, putting complementary colors like teal and orange into a photo and stuff like that. They were very well done.
Yeah, their DxO Pure Raw for denoising is also excellent.
I hear it's good. Yeah, I've only used it a couple of times, but it was good.
Yeah. Somebody asking what was the email address for the course bundle. That's support@jowp.com. We had, let's see. Oh, Steve was asking, when you did the radiant change on the lion, you know how you made the grass come out? He says, so the grass came out, but the lion's legs didn't, and they're in the same plane. How come?
Well, in that particular, it's just there's less fine detail in there. I think that's all there is. Grass, a strand of grass, when you sharpen it, really sharpens up a lot. But you could always play with that a bit if you wanted to add a bit more pop. But the subject was already, looking decently sharp. But I do that same thing. Like if there's a snowy owl sitting in a bunch of rocks on the beach, I'll put that little sliver of clarity on the focal plane just to make the rocks on the focal plane pop out a bit. It looks pretty good usually. You can do the same thing by softening the foreground and background a bit and make it even pop more.
Okay. Alan, this is a long one here. Alan said, what should I do with photos imported into Lightroom that load up with camera, sharpening, clarity, and texture, etc., picture controls? I use Topaz denoise and Photoshop unsharp mask with a low radius after Lightroom Classic to finish my processing. Should I create a preset or make an absolute flat picture control?
You can design whatever preset you want, and you can apply the preset on import if you want. And it will, if you have the same workflow every time, create it as a preset. And when you import on the right-hand side, a couple of notches down, there's a place that says apply upon import, a tick box, and you can apply the same changes to your imported photo. So instead of coming out in RAW, they come out with RAW with your applied preset right off the bat.
Okay. Let's see. Ray says, how important is lens correction in Lightroom Classic in the workflow?
I use it, and once you turn it on, it stays on. So basically, I turn it on, and it depends on your lenses. Some lenses have a lot of vignetting, the darkening of the corners, especially if lenses that you shoot wide open. The more you stop them down, the less vignetting they have. But I tick it on, and I leave it, and it stays on.
Okay. And Dre was in the, well, we'll go in the camp here. Dre says, do you suggest saving masks as one would a preset to speed up the workflow when using multiple masks?
I don't usually save masks. I'll save a few brushes like my eye touch up and stuff like that. And there are Lightroom has presets for touch up brushes like a clarity brush, a sharpness brush, and these types of things. Masks, I tend to do them one at a time. You could, but I find the mask use case scenario so variable. I'm not sure I'd end up using the same one often enough.
Okay. Steve was asking, do you sharpen the original file or the final file? Example, JPEG or TIFF?
I sharpen it in Lightroom, which is sharpening the raw as I sharpen the photo as I'm processing it, and in export, there is a sharpening thing that you can pick. You can pick sharpening and the aggressiveness, and then you can pick whether or not it's sharpening for the web or for matte paper or glossy paper for printing. So I sharpen in my processing, and I also use the output sharpening again.
Okay. Tammy wanted to know, if you crop first, are you considering megapixels that remain? Is there a way in Lightroom to display the megapixel size of a cropped image?
There is. If you press I on the keyboard, it will reveal the dimensions of you. If you press I several times, it should cycle through your settings and your dimensions. And if it's not, there's a place in Lightroom, I think it's View. Up on the left, there's a View, and then View. In there, there is a selection that allows you to change what information shows up when you press I on the keyboard. And you can show your ISO, your pixel dimensions, your settings, your aperture, a bunch of different things. So I've set mine. It shows the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. First time I click, and second time I click, it shows the camera I used and the pixel dimensions. And it's the pixel dimensions of the current crop. So if you've got 6,000 by 4,000, you got 24 megapixels.
Excellent. All right.
And for the record, 8 megapixels left over is enough for 95% of what you need to do. It's certainly enough for Facebook. It's certainly enough for Instagram, and it's enough to print this big. I think people fret over megapixels. If I'll just say right now, if this image right here was 3 megapixels or 5 megapixels, I don't think you could tell the difference. I mean, it is probably 12 to 16 megapixels, but the reality is the bigger print you make, the farther back you stand to look at it, and the less megapixels you need. So a billboard by the side of the road, 2 to 5 megapixels.
Yeah.
That's all you need. And no one ever says the billboard's not sharp.
No, I was going to say I took a sour owl picture, close up of eyes, on a 10 megapixel camera and cropped it. And it's still on the Museum of Nature here in Ottawa at about 30 feet on like a billboard, and it's probably a 6 megapixel image. So
Yeah.
yeah, don't get hung up on megapixels, folks.
Yeah.
Let's see. Peggy wants to know, does the course go into what's worth processing and what isn't worth processing? I like the crop idea, but is there anything else you look at?
I talk a little bit about cropping strategy, or culling strategy. Um, but I don't go a ton into detail. I'll say this. I used to cull for sharpness. I used to have I saw something, I took 50 photos of it, and then I'd go through and find the sharpest one. Not my plan right now. The better pose, way more important than how super critically sharp it is. But you're looking for action. You're looking for uniqueness. You're looking for the right angle. If the subject is looking straight at you for a second, that makes a really cool look. I'm looking for the wing position. I'll have a photo like this. You take lots of shots, and I want this one. And even if this one is not as sharp as this one or whatever.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Mr. Joe wanted to know, can you use Lightroom Classic on JPEG images, or do you have to use it on a RAW image?
You can use it on a JPEG. Yeah. RAW has a few advantages, and I'm not a RAW snob, by the way. I'm not a RAW snob. If someone wants to shoot JPEG for workflow, efficiency, they don't want to play around with it's fine. But in RAW, there are a few advantages. You got more dynamic range in your RAW. So if you're at risk of blowing out your whites, or your black, or crushing your blacks, you've got more flexibility. But the main one is actually in RAW, you can change your white balance after the fact without penalty. You can change your white balance in JPEG, but often it has unwanted effects on other colors at the same time. So it's not as flexible.
Okay.
But you can.
Cynthia wanted to know how to keep Lightroom masks when exported to Photoshop and then returned back to Lightroom.
Super easy. Go to Photo in Lightroom, Photo, Edit in Photoshop, and they'll open up Photoshop. You make your changes, and then you go Edit, Save, and it'll send you back to Lightroom.
All right, so that everyone's clear, the masks that you did in Lightroom.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Open in Photoshop, do the masks remain and come in?
Sorry.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know if they do. You can save a document as a PSD file, like a Photoshop file. It may, I don't know if it saves masks or not. Sorry. I didn't answer the question.
It's a good question. I think you're probably going to have to squish that file down, then bring it into Photoshop. But it's worth trying. I've never tried. I'm not a Lightroom guy.
Yeah, at a minimum, the only way you're going to do it is to save it as a Photoshop file. It's PSD or there's a Photoshop file extension. If you save it as a TIFF or stuff like that, I'm pretty sure it's not going to save it.
Okay. Anthony wanted to know, do you have any quick methods to separate background masks from multiple objects in the foreground? Example, tree branches and other busy like foregrounds.
I'm not exactly sure what the question means, but if you select the background, what you can do after you've selected the background, if it's misselected things like branches that you want to leave in because they're in focus, there's underneath the mask little box, there's a plus and a minus. You can hit the minus. If it's selected a branch that you don't want, you hit the minus. It'll take things out of your mask, and then maybe select an object brush and then paint your object, and it'll remove them from the mask.
Okay. Elaine wanted to know, can you use masks for the JOWP competition? The answer is no. Brandon wanted to know, I shoot micro four thirds primarily for its ability to get closer to subjects with its 2x crop factor without breaking the bank on lens cost, plus being extra portable. Downside, of course, is a lot of low light noise. Do you have any recommendations for tackling an excess of noise on what is otherwise a good image?
Yeah, I think first be cautious on the processing. If you've got some dark shadows, try to find a way to process the photo where the shadows look good staying dark. If you try to raise them up, they'll get noisy first. They're the noisiest part of your image. Another version is go black. If they're really bad, go black and white and leave them really dark. Black and whites look good with lots of darks and lots of lights, so leave them dark. And third option is be cautious with your sharpening and don't sharpen the noisiest parts of the image because it'll make them even noisier. And fourthly, use noise reduction software. And the smarter the stuff that you use, like the Lightroom AI ones or Topaz or these types of things, the more effective they'll be at cleaning it up without making your image mush.
All right. I'm going to Gustavo here. I was going to see if Natalia could put it up, was asking, where can I find your essentials books? Gustavo, it's not a book. It's a video course. It's the first course Simone did. And you can find it on the Journal of Wildlife photography platform. I've asked Natalia to pop a link in for that if she can while we're on the chat here, but it is a video course. And if you haven't bought that one and you're interested in the Lightroom course as well, then write support@jowp.com and we'll work out a bundle price for you on that. Let's see. Do you use Lightroom? Dale saying, do you use Lightroom mobile on your iPad just for social media or, well, I think there's some wording here, saving the images for other uses, or care you saving imaged for other uses? So I guess it's.
There's no reason I couldn't on an iPad Pro process a photo and sell a print of it. But usually I use it more for like when I take tours out in, if I take people out to Africa or something like that. And by the way, if anyone wants to sign up, I'm sold out for 2025, but I'll be coming out with some new tours over the next month or so. So you can go on my website and there's a place you can sign up to get notifications if you're interested in tours. I tend to use my iPad Pro in the field more for storage, actually. It's a better and smaller than my laptop for storing images on these SSDs when I'm on the road. And while I'm there, I'll do a presentation for example, for my guests on how to process in Lightroom or maybe on how to shoot wildlife photos. And I'll use my iPad Pro for that. It's just more convenient. And then, yeah, I'll process a few photos on the plane to post on social media. But there's no reason you couldn't use it to process. There's plenty of professional photo retouchers who just use an iPad Pro. Very, very powerful and no less competent at making good images if you know how to use it.
Yeah, great. Andrea, I bought Simone's first course and I learned a lot from it. How will the Journal of Wildlife Photography know I own that course if I use the $150 discount to buy the new course? It should come up with that discount, Andrea. If it does not, then write support@jowp.com and they will help you out with that discount. Lots of people thanking you for the session. Let's see. Thanks. Where can I find your essentials books? We've answered that. Laura want to know, okay, what's your opinion on using DPP as a first processing step and saving the file as a TIFF before importing it into Lightroom Classic? Retains the proprietary info in the file that Lightroom Classic strips off. Thought is that the image is of better quality to start with when you import it as a TIFF into Lightroom Classic.
Some people will say, I've never done it much, but some people say that DPP, which is Digital Photo Professional, it's a Canon app that comes with, you have access to. Some people say that it will do a better job decoding the RAW than Lightroom does. And some people like DxO as well. and say it does a better job. I've always used Lightroom and it's worked perfectly fine for me. But some people, sometimes you need to use DPP because Lightroom, sometimes on a new camera, it'll take them several months to be able to open the files. But so there's nothing wrong with that approach if it works for you.
Okay. We had a few people asking about the now with the photo processing, in also now asking about your wildlife essentials course. So we're putting a link in there, plus the link to this new course, which is now posted in there again for people who missed it, because things are scrolling by pretty quickly here. And then what Rob wanted to know, will you or do you use the Canon Light Optimizer?
No.
No. Okay.
I've never used, no. No, I've never used it.
Okay. Yes, there will be a replay link sent out for this presentation. Journal subscribers, of course, get it in their dashboard. All of our trainings are recorded and in the dashboard. But yes, those who are in attendance will receive a link. Great, great. How do you? Oh, do you have any tips on vignetting in Lightroom?
I like you putting a little dark vignette, but only to the point that you can't tell it's there. And as for everything in Lightroom, sliders are the most amazing thing that's ever been invented. It's like a volume knob in your car. Like there's no better thing than a volume knob. You twist it right, it's too much. You twist it left, it's not enough. You do that until it's just right. The slider is the perfect thing. You slide it until it's too much and you back it off a bit. So that I like putting a little bit of a vignette around a photo just to bring the eye to the center. But if you can tell it's there, it's actually too much. So you move it, add some vignette until you can tell and just back it off a bit. And I'm not a fan of the light vignette making the corners light. Not
or
really.
Dark.
Yeah, I've seen, I mean, it could work, for example, let's say in Bill's background, if the corners were a bit dark and you wanted to make them white to match the rest of the snow, because they were white from lens vignetting and you wanted to make the corners white again, you could add some vignetting and make them brighter. But other than that, I don't like the white vignette.
All right. Sue wanted to know, what can you do to fix a photo that has heat waves in it, making the photo look out of focus?
It's not really fixable, unfortunately. Heat haze. So this is like heat haze, same causes a mirage in the desert. Heat radiating it up creates waves of different densities of air and makes the images look crap. So a couple of tips: shoot early in the day before the heat builds up. Shoot under the canopy of the trees where it's cooler. Number one tip: don't go out in the cold in your warm vehicle and shoot. Lower the window and shoot out of a warm vehicle into cold air. I've got some beautiful footage of heat plumes coming out of a vehicle open window, and there's no. So if you go out shooting, hey, I saw this beautiful owl in the wintertime by the side of the road. I lowered my window, took some photos, got home. It was soft. It was crap. It's because your car was warm and the outside was cold. So what do? I turn off the heater 10 minutes before I get to my destination, and I open the windows and I make sure I'm dressed for winter in the car, and I leave the heater off. I might turn the seat heater on, but that's about it, and leave the windows open and make sure that the air in the vehicle is the same temperature as outside, and your photos will be tack sharp.
Yeah, it's a great tip when it's minus 25.
And can I add, heat haze in a lens hood is a thing. You wouldn't think it is. But if you take a big 500 millimeter f4 with that big lens hood and you take it outside, you jump outside of a warm car into the cold and take a bunch of photos, just the warm air in the hood will make it not sharp. You wouldn't believe it, but it does. So take the hood off. I either take the hood off when I jump out to take a photo, or I'll take the hood off and stick the lens out of the car into the cold air for about 20 seconds. And that seems to solve it.
Yeah, a lot of people also use the hood of their car when they stop to lean against.
Never, 100%, Bill. Like I mentioned that in my first course. Don't jump out of the vehicle and put your elbows on the hood of the car above the engine and try to take photos.
Yeah.
Won't work.
Yeah. And if you can get closer to your subject, you can eliminate a little of that heat
Yeah,
haze.
closer is better. The more air you're shooting through, the worse it's going to be. And as well,
Yeah.
another heat haze thing is sometimes in really cold days in really warm water, you'll get this haze about, oh, but it's only like a foot above the water. Like usually you like a low angle for shooting ducks, for example. And sometimes you'll shoot the ducks and it'll come out soft. All you got to do is go up a foot or two and they'll sharpen up quite a bit.
Right. We could probably have a whole session on this one, Simone. Rogers wants to know, when printing on luster paper, do you export as matte or glossy?
I've tried a bit of both, and I think it depends on the paper and it depends on the image. So there's no real answer.
Uh, well, you're a Canon guy, so you're going to like this next one. I have an equivalent. Okay, so this is a gear related question, but we'll entertain it. Steve says, I have an equipment question. I have an APS-C Canon 80D shooter since starting with photography, looking to update my equipment, and I'm torn between moving to full frame, but have a tendency of cropping really tight. I like to really focus on the subjects. Is it better to go high megapixel like an R5, or keep the APS-C R7 at 30 megapixels?
If you can get the R5, I probably would, because after you crop it to APS-C dimensions, you might still only have 24 megapixels, which is less than 32 for the R7, but you'll get a stop better light performance. The autofocus is maybe a little bit better. And you can get a used R5. You don't need the R5 Mark II, or you can get the original R5 or a used R5. And I just find I like the colors more. For this processing stuff that we've been doing today, I find with a full frame, you got a little bit more ability to push the processing and the colors with a full frame than you do with an R7. But if you decide to get an R7, you'll be fine. Don't worry. You'll have a great camera. But I'd get the R7 over an R6, for example, where after you crop the R6 to APS-C, you'd be down to 8 megapixels, maybe, or 10. So, but if you can swing the R5, you still got plenty of megapixels to play with.
Okay. Okay, for Nikon users where raw files are .nef, do you recommend converting to DNG files before processing in Lightroom? I'm a
I don't shoot
guy.
Nikon, but I don't think it's needed, is it, Bill?
No, it's not. It's no different than Canon. I take the raw file in and edit the raw file. You can export it as a DNG if you prefer to keep the raw format, but I usually export in a TIFF file.
Yeah.
Personally.
Yep.
Let's get, what time are we at here, Simone? I'm cognizant of your time because we're on 10.
Well, I'm cognizant on everyone else's time, but why don't we go another 8 minutes? That'll bring us right to the hour.
Yeah. Now let me see. I'm scrolling through now.
And the Sony guy who shoots at a 6700, you're more than welcome to be here. I'm not a gear snob by a million miles, even though I'm a Canon ambassador.
Caden was asking, what do you think of full spectrum cameras and IR photography? Have you tried it before?
Not for wildlife. I think it's cool for landscape. A photo taken in infrared of a nice tree against a blue sky where the tree's white and the sky's black looks really, really cool. Yeah,
I had a friend who converted an old DSLR camera into IR, which you can have done and specifically use it for IR. And the images that are coming out, I submit, they're very unique. And I love the look.
Same here. You're looking to stand out in the crowd. Yeah, good idea.
Let's see. Okay, we did have a whole bunch of people asking early on about how do you edit your astro photography, and then now we got people asking about, do you use Star Tracker for your Milky Way photos, and so on and so forth. I don't want to get into that because this is wildlife, but do you have a YouTube video that would help people?
I have 2 YouTube videos, one on how to shoot the Milky Way and one how to use a stacking technique and Photoshop to shoot the background, the sky and the foreground separately in YouTube as well. So I have 2. I don't use a tracker actually for most of my Milky Way photos. But what I do, I take 12 photos of the sky and I stack them for improved resolution and lower noise. I've got a video on that.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So Pete says, thanks for helping me with selection of a camera. If you could only buy one lens under $600, what would it be? Now, this might be where we say it's brand agnostic and we go to what focal range you might look at.
I'd probably find the best 100 to 400 millimeter lens that you can find. I'd recommend 150 to 600, but I'm not sure you're going to get one for under $600. You might find a used Sigma or Tamron 150 to 600 for under $600. But for some people, a 300 millimeter f4, if you could find a used one for under $600, would be a decent lens as well. But for most people, a figure 100 to 400 lens, if you could find one, would be decent and flexible.
Yeah,
Bill, you got any other ideas?
Well, Nikon has an older 80 to 400 that'd fall into that same camp, because I think what we're talking about is what zoom range, like what range do you want? You're not going to find a 400, 500, 600, any of those in the $600 range. It's going to be a cheaper zoom lens. So I shot with the 80 to 400 for a while on the DSLR and Nikon, and it was, I mean, it's not the greatest lens, but for $600, I'd use it.
Yeah.
200 to 500's another lens. It came out new at like $1,500 in the
the Nikon 200 to 500 is a very good lens. If someone's a Nikon shooter, even with an adapter on a mirrorless camera, very, very good lens for the money.
Yeah, the adapters do work very well. So anybody shooting Nikon, if you can pick up an F mount lens and use the adapter on your Z mount camera, it works just fine. Joanne is asking, what's the minimum you would crop to? So I guess
I have cropped images down to 1500 pixels on the long edge. It depends. The sharper your lens is, the deeper you can crop. But for Facebook and Instagram, you can crop down to 1500 pixels on the long edge and no one will know any better. For printing, I'd like to have 2,500 pixels on the long edge, 3,000 preferably. But for Facebook and Instagram, you can get by with a lot less.
Okay. Fran was asking, what's the difference between save and save as in Photoshop? And now I see they also have save a copy.
Oh, yeah. Save will save your file in the current file name, in the current status. It'll overwrite what you had before in Photoshop. So if you import a photo into Photoshop and it's of 6 pigeons and you crop out 4 and you hit save, you'll lose those 2 pigeons forever. If you want to save a copy of the photo so that you still have the original 6 pigeons and the new photo with the 4 pigeons, click save as. Or if you want to save a copy in a different location, hit save as. And when you hit save as, you can change the name and you can change the location so that the original will survive. Save a copy means making a duplicate copy of the current status of where you're at. So it's just another version of save as. But when you save a copy, you can also save it as a DNG or, change the format as well.
Okay. Susie wanted to know, what level of photographer is your first essentials course for?
Beginner to intermediate. So basically, if you're a seasoned pro, it's not, you'll learn a few things, but it's not your target market. I help people right from the beginning how to set shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, and find, how those settings work, how to program your autofocus system, how to hold the camera, the whole thing. And it includes two modules on how to process your photos, just for the basics. But obviously, I've overtaken that with my new course.
Okay. Mary wanted to know, do you ever regret cropping first and then not having the edited final in another size? Maybe a client wants a different size.
I always save the raw. and save the original. I can always go back. And Lightroom, as beautiful it is non-destructive. So I can actually go back to my original process and just go back to the crop function and open up the crop.
Yep. Yeah, always save your raw, folks. That's the learning here.
Yeah, in Photoshop, hit save as, make a duplicate of your photo to process it. But in Lightroom, always non-destructive.
Okay. Cameron wanted to know, how do you use texture versus clarity sliders in Lightroom?
Well, these are all good questions from my course. You guys should only pay 20 bucks a piece because the answer is it's in my course. I should actually not answer the question and just say it's in my course, but actually the difference between texture and clarity, I actually show it on photos in my course. Clarity makes things pop more. It's a bit of sharpness, it's a bit of contrast, but clarity works on a large scale. If you've got a tree in the background, the tree will get clearer. But when you move the texture slider works on a micro level. The tree actually won't get any, looking full screen, you move the texture slider, the tree in the background is not going to change. If you zoom in, you'll see that the leaves got sharper, but the tree didn't change. But the clarity slider, when you look at big, move the clarity slider, the tree will get sharper and more contrasty. So clarity works on large scale, texture on fine scale.
Okay. Jill was asked, contests require the raw file. What if you didn't shoot in raw? Will you be disqualified? Well, Jill, that's going to be dependent on the contest and what their rules are. For our contest, for example, we allow our beginner category to submit a JPEG, but our intermediate and advanced have to shoot and submit. They'll submit it in a JPEG, but if you are one of the finalists, we're going to ask for your raw file. And the reason we do that is we want to make sure to what extent the photo was edited. You're not allowed to clone things out, add things in, and so on and so forth. And the raw allows us to determine how much manipulation has happened for the file.
Some contests will take a JPEG.
Yeah,
it'll depend.
Don says, do you work with CR2 or convert to DNG?
I leave in CR, and the new cameras shoot CR3. I've never done the DNG conversion thing. I just go straight from the Canon RAW and open and process in that and export in JPEG. Most of the time, I export in Adobe for printing. Okay.
And I see we're up against 10 o'clock, so we'll do one more here.
One more.
What's your opinion on extending the width of the canvas to save an image, such as a bird where the wing tips are clipped?
You're going to get another 20 bucks. I have a bonus module in my course that shows 2 Photoshop tricks that you can't do in Lightroom, as one of them is extending the canvas. So let's say I've done it before. I'm not a big fan. I would never do it for a contest. You can't do it for a contest. I've done it for Facebook before, where I cut off. I've got this beautiful photo of a mallard, and you can see my fingertips. The wing is there, and I cut off the tops. So in Photoshop, you can add some canvas, and using AI, you can circle the top and say generate, and it'll generate the tips. I've done it. I've done it a couple of times on Facebook and stuff. And when I do, I usually like to declare that I did. I'm not one, my ethics are, and I'm never going to preach ethics like what you should do. My ethics around using AI, I don't mind using smart AI to take things out. So, but if there's but I don't like using AI to add things in. I've never posted a photo where I used AI to add an eyeball or add, I'm not an ad guy, but to smartly take a branch out of, the wing of a bird, I might use AI to do that, but I'll never add something. But anyway, you can add canvas if you've cropped out something, and you don't need to use, I don't use add canvas to add, let's say I've cut off the wings at the top. I don't use it there, but let's say I've got my wing right there, but I'd like a crop to have more room above. I'll use add canvas to give me more room so the wingtip's not so close to the edge, and I'll add some canvas here so that the wing is not so close to the edge. So I use add canvas to add empty canvas for different cropping options, not to add features to my subject.
Right. But to that, AI generative will do a great job of those fingertips that Simone had cut off. It'll add them back on. So if you've got that image where you cut off the wingtip and you want it for your own use, for your files, or selling a print or putting a print in your home, give it a try, because it actually works amazingly well. It's up to you whether you want to use it or not. Well, okay. With that, Simone, because we're after 10 o'clock, I really appreciate the time you've spent with us tonight. Folks, the link for Simone's new course for Lightroom and his Essentials course, the first one, are both posted in the chat. You can take a look at that if you didn't grab the link. You can write if you missed the links, or you have questions about the pricing, or you bought the first course and you want the second course, and all of those questions, write support@jowp.com. They will assist you. I can't thank you enough, Simone. The number of people now in the chat saying, "Oh my God, great! Simone always does a great job. I learned so much from his YouTube channel. Tonight was amazing. I learned more tonight than I've learned in 20 years," and so on and so forth. Gushing. Wonderful job tonight, as usual.
I'm happy to help, actually. I love helping. I'm the opposite of the gatekeeper guy who's going to protect all the insider secrets so that no one... If someone can take from this and go take better pictures than me, that will be success for me. Like, go out there and kick my butt and take some beautiful photos. I'd be happy to see it. I enjoy seeing people succeed. And as I say in my videos, I know you can do it.
Very good. All right, folks. In June, we've got a National Geographic contributor with us. So watch for that one, that link coming out for that training. That one's going to be very exciting. And with that, I am going to bid everyone a great night. For those of you, some of you, I know it's your morning, but for us, we're going to bed. So have a great night. Simone, thanks again. And the recording will be sent out for everybody who asked for it, wasn't able to make the call, and so on and so forth. So we'll have that out shortly. Thanks again, folks.
Thanks, everyone, for staying up, and being all kind of odd hours. And thanks to you, Bill, and to our friends, Jason and Kevin and Natalia at the Journal. Always appreciate your partnership. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed it, and also hope that you can put these tips to good use your very next outing, so you too can come home with your own unique and amazing photos. I know you can do it.